Hi folks, Men of the Finite with you again. This is a video response to Veritas 48, real name Noah, and his recent video, 5 Questions for Atheists. No preamble from me, let's just get straight into those questions.
The question is, if when you die, right, you find yourself in a place of judgment in front of God, and it ends up being the case that all those pesky Christians were right all along, what would your first statement be to God? If you could choose anything to say to God at that point, what would it be and why?
My response to that question is basically just to dismiss it. You know, hypothetical scenarios and questions can be interesting if they contain some semblance of plausibility or possibility. This one does not. The God of your scenario, of this question's scenario, is a flat-out impossibility. Therefore, the question is really quite pointless, and therefore I'm not even going to attempt to address it. But what I will add is that you really don't have to be dead to be confronted by deluded entities that proclaim themselves to be God.
The second question is, again, something that you've all probably been asked quite a bit, but I want to have my shot at asking it too, okay? What sort of evidence would you find sufficient for you to abandon atheism and become a believer in God? Not particularly Christianity per se, but just God, like a general sort of theism.
Well, the first thing to be said there is that no kind of empirical evidence whatsoever would be sufficient, or even compelling, or even particularly interesting to me. Things like booming voices from the sky, etc. Any person who would be influenced, let alone convinced, of the existence of God on the basis of something like a booming voice from the sky is the sort of idiot who probably should be a theist in the first place. The only evidence that could possibly interest me would be an irrefutable, logical argument for the necessity of the existence of God. Now, no such argument exists, and more than that, no such argument is possible. Therefore, for me at least, there is no possibility of any kind of evidence that would cause me to entertain a theistic perspective on God.
Third, do you think the new atheist movement is ultimately a good thing or a bad thing for free thinkers and skeptics?
Okay, well, this is a slightly more interesting question, and my answer to it is yes and no. Slightly more yes than no. I think it's a good thing not just for atheists and skeptics and free thinkers and such like, but for humanity in general, because any movement that seeks to remove delusion from the face of the earth has got to be a good thing. So in that sense, yes, it's a positive thing. Any enterprise whatsoever that concerns itself with what is true and seeks to eliminate what is not is necessarily a good thing in my view. However, I would much prefer that this new movement was led by persons such as Sam Harris, who is willing to entertain the idea of a humanistic kind of spirituality and who's willing to go beyond the narrow parameters of scientific epistemology, scientific materialism, and physicalism itself. In that sense, this new atheistic movement is philosophically really quite limited. That said, I think it's primarily a very good thing.
Fourth, what sorts of decisions are affected by your atheism? I really like this question. I like my own question. Wow, that's not the height of narcissism. Okay, let me unpack what I mean here. Are there decisions that you make in your life, aside from the obvious denial of theism, that are a direct result of your views on the non-existence or lack of evidence for God? So, for example, political choices or moral choices or economic choices. Is there anything that atheism has impacted in such a way that you can look back and say, you know, I don't think I would hold this other view if I wasn't an atheist?
I can't help but think that answering yes in any way to that question would necessitate expanding the meaning of atheism beyond what it really actually means. Atheism is really only one specific facet of my overall philosophical view, my overall worldview. And I can't think of any decisions that I could relate back to atheism specifically. Not off the top of my head, I can't think of a single one.
And lastly, my fifth and final question, what is more important to you as an atheist? I mean, I guess this could really apply to you as a person, not simply an atheist, but What's more important, acquiring as many true beliefs as possible or not acquiring as many false beliefs as possible? And let me repeat that. Which one of these is more important? Gaining true beliefs about the world or not gaining false beliefs about the world?
Well, first of all, I'm not really sure what a true belief is. If a thing is true, it doesn't require belief. The very term true belief strikes me as a glaring oxymoron. But that aside, I can't help but think that this question pretty much sets up a false dichotomy. I don't see any reason why a person can't do both of those things simultaneously and in the same measure. If you're striving to gain knowledge of the world, you are of necessity striving not to be trapped within delusions. Now, in your explanation of that question, which I haven't bothered to include, you mentioned skepticism, and you talk about skepticism as being a potentially negative thing. And I guess it can be, but not if it's driven by a desire for truth and an intellectual conscience. Where skepticism is driven by an intellectual conscience, it's one of the great intellectual virtues. Actually, you know what, the more I think about your question, the more I'm convinced that it actually does set up a pretty glaring false dichotomy. There's no reason why you need to choose one or the other thing. I might also just point out that you cannot know whether you possess false beliefs about the world and therefore strive to avoid them unless you are simultaneously gaining knowledge about that world. Those are my responses for what it's worth. And as we say here in the Antipodes, see you round like a rissole.